This video was sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsahone, and it's Friday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. Over the years, I've done a lot of top 10s that cover a specific creature type, and that's what we're doing today. We're actually looking at one of Magic's newest creature type, and that's Phyrexians. And yeah, that is apparently how you say it. I've been saying Phyrexian for like 20 years, but for this video I figured I should make sure I was pronouncing it the right way, but the official Wizards of the Coast pronunciation is actually Phyrexian. We'll see whether or not I can avoid slipping into my old pronunciation somewhere in this video. Anyway, as evidenced by the fact that the word has been part of the game for 20 plus years, Phyrexians have been around for a very long time. They are inhabitants of Phyrexia or New Phyrexia who have undergone the process of completion, which ultimately makes a being entirely mechanical. But most Phyrexians have both biological and mechanical parts. They have attempted to invade Dominaria and complete the whole plane, but they failed. However, they succeeded in doing so on Mirrodin, converting it into New Phyrexia. So, Phyrexians have been part of Magic lore from the beginning almost, but they weren't given a creature type officially until Kaldheim, where Vorinclex appeared sporting this new creature type. With the release of Modern Horizons 2, Wizards has retroactively applied the Phyrexian type on cards from the game's past as far back as Antiquities, giving it to any creature, which flavorfully is a Phyrexian. To be eligible for this list, a creature had to have the Phyrexian creature type, or be a card that makes Phyrexian creature tokens. In all, there were 250 cards that met these requirements, and in this video I'll talk about the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A top 8 at a Pro Tour, Players Tour, Mythic Championship, Mythic Invitational, Legacy, or Vintage Championship is worth 2 points, and a top 8 at a Magic Fest or Grand Prix is worth 1 point. At number 10, it is Phyrexian Processor. Unsurprisingly, the token here has received erratum to be a Phyrexian minion. This artifact can churn out creature tokens, and they can be pretty darn large too, since they will have as much power and toughness as however much life you paid when you played it. It was widely played in block-constructed standard and extended decks largely because of the large presence of good artifact payoffs in those formats. Its most frequent home was Tinker decks, which used the eponymous spell to search up whatever artifact they wanted and put it into play. Those decks had tons of mana too as a result of Metalworker and or Tolarian Academy, so playing the processor early and using it every turn wasn't really a challenge, and it was paired quite well with Voltaic Key, as you could use it to churn out even more creature tokens. With all the mana and untap effects the deck had available, it really wasn't that hard to churn out 2 10/10s a turn with Phyrexian Processor, and obviously that's going to get you there in the end. Phyrexian Processor doesn't have any points since 2003, and there are several cards not too far behind it that are still gaining points, like Glistener Elf and Elesh Norn, so it is unlikely to be on this list if I revisit it in a few years. At number 9, it is Blightsteel Colossus, which is now a Phyrexian Golem. All of the cards with Infect are Phyrexians now, actually, but Blightsteel is the only one that made the list. Blightsteel is massively expensive, of course, but between Trample and Infect, it can usually win the game in a single swing, and it also isn't easy to deal with as a result of indestructibility. So yeah, it definitely gives you what you need for the massive amount of mana you spend. The decks that run the Colossus can either produce absurd amounts of mana or cheat it into play. It has gained all of its points in the Eternal formats. And Legacy decks would get him into play with Koldath Forgemaster or by using Metalworker to produce tons of mana. In Vintage, there are no shortage of ways to cheat this into play, with Oath of Druids and Tinker being the most common ways to do it. The Colossus is played a ton in Vintage decks as a result. Even Storm decks tend to run Tinker and the Colossus as a backup win condition, leading to its fairly massive score in the format, and it's likely to continue to gain points going forward. At number 8, it is Deceiver Exarch. The Exarch is part of a modal cycle of Exarchs in New Phyrexia, and now the whole cycle has the Phyrexian creature type. The Exarch gives you the option of either untapping one of your permanents or tapping one of your opponents. Most famously, Deceiver Exarch has been used with Splinter Twin to create an infinite combo. This was done the most in Modern, but Exarch has also earned points alongside Splinter Twin in Standard and Legacy. If you put Splinter Twin on your Exarch and then tap it to make a copy of itself, the new copy can then untap the Exarch with Splinter Twin on it, so you can make as many copies as you want. The fact that the Exarch has Flash really makes this combo potent. You could flash the Exarch in at the end of your opponent's turn to tap down a problem permanent or a land, making it a little harder for your opponent to interact with what you're doing on your turn, at which point it is much safer to play Splinter Twin and go off. Splinter Twin got banned in Modern, though, in early 2016, and Deceiver Exarch hasn't seen play anywhere since then. At number 7, it is Plague Engineer, a Phyrexian that really hates on tribal decks. One of the things Phyrexians are known for is spreading disease, and Plague Engineer doesn't disappoint there. Modern and Legacy are both formats where tribal decks are a pretty big presence. Humans in Modern and Elves and Merfolk in Legacy, and the Engineer really wreaks havoc on both of those decks. It also hates on any deck that is really focused on 1/1 creature tokens, so it also makes a good counter for Thopter Foundry decks. The prevalence of those decks means that the Engineer has been played a whole lot since its relatively recent printing in 2019, and because the effect is one-sided, it can even be played in mirror matches. It's going to continue to gain points in both Modern and Legacy. At number 6, it is Vault Scourge, which has the Phyrexian type now, which makes sense because it's always cost Phyrexian mana, which in this case gives you the option of paying 2 life or 1 black in addition to the 1 generic mana to cast the Scourge. This means that it is pretty much a 1 mana 1/1 with flying and lifelink, and on top of that, it's an artifact. All of that together is a great deal, especially in a deck that can take advantage of all of those things, which is generally an artifact-based aggro deck. Vault Scourge was at its most impressive in Modern Affinity decks, where it was played alongside Arcbound Ravager and Cranial Plating, both of which are cards that can make the Scourge hit a heck of a lot harder, which of course also means you're gaining a lot of life and making it impossible for your opponent to ever win a race against you. The Scourge doesn't have any points since 2019 though, as Affinity decks shifted into Hardened Scales decks and then Mox Opal got banned. The recent printing of new artifact lands and new cards with Affinity in Modern Horizons 2 might mean that the Scourge has a chance at gaining some points in a new Modern Affinity deck going forward, but we'll see. At number 5, it is Phyrexian Revoker. The Revoker brings reasonable stats and an ability that can shut down key cards, making him a pretty traditional hate bear. One thing that the Revoker does that similar effects can't do is that he also shuts off activated abilities of cards that are mana abilities. Obviously, he can't name lands, but he can name other mana-producing permanents, which is great. Being able to turn off mana rocks in some formats is a big deal. In addition to that, he can also do the stuff that other cards like this can do, shut down planeswalkers entirely or turn off other cards with problematic and powerful activated abilities. Despite being legal in Standard twice, once from its original printing in Mirrored and Besieged, and a second time from a reprint in Magic 2015, it only managed 6 points in Standard. There just weren't enough powerful cards that it was useful against. However, it has thrived in other formats with larger card pools and more problematic cards with activated abilities. In Modern, it's played in Creature Toolbox decks that can search up the Revoker when it is something they need to stop a specific card of the opponent's. In Legacy, it's mostly played in Death and Taxes, a hate bear focus deck that runs a lot of reasonably efficient creatures who hate on various strategies. The Revoker is played the most, though, in Magic's most powerful format, Vintage, where it fits right into the artifact-centric Mud and Ravager Shops decks, as well as Eldrazi aggro. There are tons of scary cards for it to blank in Vintage, including the Power 9 Mana Rocks. Phyrexian Revoker is going to continue to gain points going forward, and as a result has a great chance at moving further up this list. At number 4, it is Phyrexian Metamorph, another Phyrexian mana creature. This has a pretty sweet clone effect. Clones tend to be pretty nice cards since they will always be the best creature on the battlefield, and Phyrexian Metamorph adds some extra utility because it can also copy artifacts. Plus, the whole Phyrexian mana thing means you can play it in literally any deck. The Metamorph has seen play in just about every format it has been legal in. In Standard and Modern, it was pretty nice in the Birthing Pod deck, as sometimes tutoring up a clone of your best creature, or your opponent's best creature, is your best move. It could also clone the pod itself if it had to. It also saw play in a pretty wide variety of other Standard decks, especially Delver and Aggro decks. In Legacy, it's been played in Eldrazi Aggro and Painter combo, and in Vintage, it has been played in the artifact-focused Ravager Shops deck. It doesn't have any points, though, since 2019. At number 3, it is Worm Coil Engine, which is now a Phyrexian Worm, which is a pretty scary creature-type combination. Not only is it a huge efficient creature with lifelink and death touch, when it dies, it also makes 2/3/3 tokens, one of which has death touch and one of which has lifelink. Dealing with Wurmcoil Engine is no joke, and if you don't have a way to exile it or otherwise deal with it without actually killing it, you're probably going to lose. While it was played some in Standard, it has really excelled in Modern, where there are several decks that can put it into play early. Tron decks can do it on turn 3, as can decks running Bounce Lands and Amulet of Vigor. Wurmcoil Engine is hard enough to deal with when it comes down late, so it coming down early is a real nightmare. In addition to seeing tons of play in Modern, it has also added to its score in Magic's most powerful format, Vintage, where it has seen a lot of play in Mud, a deck I mentioned earlier. Wurmcoil Engine is going to continue gaining points in the future, but it seems sort of unlikely it ever catches the 2 cards in front of it because they have significant leads, and they're also still being played on a regular basis. And at number 2, it is Batskull. As part of the Phyrexian errata, all cards with Living Weapon now create Phyrexian germ tokens, so that's how Batskull got here. Because it comes with that Living Weapon effect, it's basically a 5-mana 4/4 with Vigilance and Lifelink that can return to your hand when you need it to. Now, that on its own isn't crazy impressive, but Lifelink and Vigilance do pair really well together and are highly effective at countering aggro decks. That said, the Skull itself wouldn't be so good if it weren't for its frequent running mate, Stoneforge Mystic. Those 2 cards have teamed up to gain points in Standard, Modern, Legacy, and Vintage. The Mystic can search up Batskull and then cheat it into play early. That is powerful enough that ultimately the Mystic got banned out of Standard and Extended, and it was even preemptively banned when Modern was created in 2011. Despite those bans, Batskull still gained some points in both Modern and Standard, but mostly as a sideboard card. The Mystic was never banned in Legacy, allowing it to amass several points there, and in 2019, the Mystic also got unbanned in Modern, leading to a massive resurgence for Batskull. Batskull is still putting up points at a pretty impressive clip, but so is the number 1 card on this list, which is Spellskyite, another Phyrexian that also involves the powerful Phyrexian mana mechanic. It comes with the ability to redirect spells and abilities to itself, and you don't even need mana to do it. Spellskyite is one of the most played sideboard cards in multiple formats since it can so effectively mess with so many different strategies. On a basic level, you can use it to protect other creatures by redirecting removal spells to the Spellskyite, but you can also tamper with your opponent's plans. If they're a deck interested in putting auras on their things or using combat tricks on their creatures, because you can redirect those types of things to Spellskyite too. It has seen the most play in Modern, and it used to be one of the best sideboard options against Splinter Twin, since you can redirect the Splinter Twin onto your own Spellskyite. Since Twin was banned out of Modern, it hasn't seen as much play, but it still picks up some points every year, as it is still useful against decks like Bogles, Burn, and Infect. It also is pretty good in decks like Infect, since you can use it to redirect removal. It has such a huge lead, it's hard to imagine Spellskyite ever losing its position on this list, but Batskull might just have an outside chance of doing it. So, there you have it. Those are the 10 cards with the newly added Phyrexian creature type that have made the biggest impact on competitive Magic. The creature type might be brand new, but because it was added on so many old cards, Phyrexians are already one of the more powerful creature types in the game. If you're interested in getting your hands on some of these powerful Phyrexians, I have you covered. In the description, you can find a direct link to the Card Kingdom store for each card that made this list. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. And if you want to see more of my MTG top 10s, including tons of others on creature types, you should see some playlists on your screen shortly. Lastly, if you enjoy my videos on this channel, you might also enjoy the history videos I put up on my other YouTube channel, Need to Hone History. Thanks for watching.